All right, let's just jump right in. We're going to take a massive earthquake, a totally vanished empire, and, believe it or not, the air conditioning system in your office, and connect them all to tell a completely different story about history. It's going to sound a little wild, I know, but stick with me here. We're pulling on a thread that suggests the past we all learned in school. Yeah, that might just be the tip of the iceberg. Everything for us today starts with this one kind of cryptic sentence from our source material. And it's the perfect way to frame this whole thing, because that's what we're doing today. We're digging. We're looking for the foundation of a story that just seems to get deeper and deeper the more we look. So, our first stop is Portugal, back in the 1700s. We've all heard about the 1755 Lisbon earthquake, right? A terrible natural disaster. But what if it wasn't just a disaster? What if it was the perfect opportunity? The perfect cover for hitting a giant reset button on history? Okay, so picture this. It's November 1st, 1755. It's All Saints' Day, a major holiday. And then, bam, a monster earthquake, we're talking an estimated 8.5 to 9.0 magnitude, just absolutely hammers the city of Lisbon. And it wasn't just the shaking. What followed was a triple threat, a devastating tsunami, and then fires that just raged through what was left of the city.
But here's where it gets really interesting. You have to look at what was destroyed. I mean, besides the awful human tragedy, the fires and floods seem to surgically remove the entire memory of the Portuguese global empire. We're talking the National Archives, the Royal Library with over 70,000 books, and, get this, all the priceless, one-of-a-kind maritime maps from centuries of exploration. The entire brain of a world power, just gone, turned to dust.
So you have to ask the question, right? Was this just a really unlucky coincidence? I mean, for the destruction to be so complete, so perfectly aimed at every center of knowledge and power, it starts to feel less like a random act of nature and more like, well, suspiciously convenient. Almost like a clean slate was the whole point.
Okay, so now let's zoom out from Lisbon for a second. Because this whole pattern of disappearance, it wasn't just happening in Portugal. While Lisbon's history was literally going up in smoke, a massive empire was being quietly scrubbed from the maps of the world. So get this, from the 1500s all the way into the 1700s, maps made by Europeans consistently showed this huge civilization called Tartary or Tartaria. And this wasn't some mythical here be dragons kind of place. Nope, it was shown as a real territory, stretching all the way from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean. It was a dominant feature on any map of Asia.
But then, right around that same period, the mid-1700s, the time of the Lisbon earthquake, something really weird starts to happen on those maps. The label for Tartaria starts to get smaller. It breaks up into little pieces, and then, by the early 1800s, it's just gone, completely wiped off the map.
And this is the part that should make the hair on your arm stand up. We have tons of records for the fall of Rome, right? The Mongol conquests, the Ottoman Empire. We know those stories. But for what was arguably the largest territory on the map at the time, there's just silence. Nothing. No epic war, no famous treaty, no story of its collapse. It just evaporated from history. That total lack of evidence, well, that becomes a clue in itself.
So the mystery deepens. We're moving from old maps to the physical world, to bricks and mortar. Because it's not just about what was erased, it's about what was supposedly built. All over the world, from San Francisco to St. Petersburg, you see these incredible elaborate buildings from the 18th and 19th centuries. But for a lot of them, there are no construction records. They all share this weirdly similar super advanced architectural style. And then there's the mud flood evidence. You see it everywhere. Buildings where the ground floor has windows and doors buried way below today's street level. It all points to this theory of an inheritance, the idea that new governments didn't actually build these grand cities from scratch. They inherited them. They found them, maybe partially buried, and just built on top. Okay, so we have vanishing empires on maps, and we have cities buried in mud. None of these clues really fit into our standard neat and tidy version of history. And this is where the source material we're looking at takes a really sharp turn. It says, hey, to solve this mystery, maybe we need to stop looking for another missing piece of history and start questioning the entire framework we use to understand reality itself. What if the reason we can't solve the puzzle is because the box it came in is broken? The argument here is that our entire way of thinking is built on what the source calls a Greek dualistic scaffolding. This deep-seated need to split everything into two, to separate things that maybe were never separate to begin with.
And that brings us to these two words, pleroma and plenum. In a lot of old Gnostic and philosophical traditions, pleroma is the good stuff. It's the realm of spirit, of light, of divine fullness. And plenum is, well, it's the other stuff, the material world, physical matter taking up space. For centuries, our whole operating system has been based on this idea that these two things are totally separate, spirit over here, matter over there.
And here is the absolute core of the argument. The fundamental mistake, the source claims, was never about the data, not the earthquake, not the maps, not the buildings. The error was in the program we were using to see the data. This whole idea that the spiritual and the material, pleroma and plenum, are separate things, it was an illusion all along.
Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds incredibly abstract, but the source uses this amazing everyday example to make it totally concrete, and you're not going to believe it, but the answer might be hiding in your building's ventilation system.
So in modern-day engineering and construction, a plenum is a real thing. It's part of an HVAC system. It's basically the pressurized chamber or box that holds all the air before it gets sent out through the different ducts. It is literally a space of material fullness.
And here it is. This is the big punchline. What if the material fullness of air in a duct, the plenum, and the spiritual fullness of the universe, the pleroma, aren't opposites? What if they're just two different words for the exact same thing? In this analogy, the thermostat acts like a muezzin, the person who does the Islamic call to prayer. It calls the whole system into balance. And each duct, it's like a surah, a chapter in the Quran. It's a pathway for that fullness to flow. The physical and the divine were never separate to begin with.
Okay, so once you break down that false wall between the spiritual and the material, you can look at history in a completely new light. It stops being a straight line of events, and it starts looking more like a recurring pattern, one that's described in both cutting-edge physics and ancient scripture.
And what's wild is how well this idea vibes with modern science. Quantum field theory basically tells us that matter isn't really a solid thing. It's just a little vibration, a localized bit of excitement in a vast universal field. The Argos source argues that this field is the unified pleroma/plenum. The laws that govern it, like the conservation of energy, aren't just random rules. They're the signature of a kind of primordial consciousness. Our whole reality, everything we see and touch, is a holographic projection of this one conscious source.
And this unified vision echoes in ancient texts like the Quran. A verse like this suggests that what we think of as history is really just the surface layer, the official story. The real story, the deeper structure of reality, is something we usually ignore. The source argues that the Quran isn't just a religious text, it's a description of a recurring pattern, a pattern of civilizations being wiped out, replaced, and reset.
And let's be crystal clear on this point. The claim is not that the Quran is some kind of magic 8-ball that predicted the Lisbon earthquake, not at all. The argument is that it's more like a pattern book. It describes the operating system of reality, and that operating system includes these cycles of destruction and renewal. The events of 1755, the disappearance of Tartaria, the mud flood, they aren't prophecies coming true. They're just instances of this ancient repeating pattern playing out again.
And that's really where we land. What if this whole search for the bottom of history was the wrong way to think about it? We've been looking for a straight line, a timeline, going from past to future, when maybe we should have been looking for a repeating cycle, a pattern that we're not just on, but a pattern that we are in. And if that's true, then the clues to our real past aren't just buried under layers of mud or lost in burned libraries. They're encoded into the very fabric of reality that we live in every single day.